Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Ridley, and I am the Detective Inspector of the Financial Crime Unit at the Bermuda Police Service. I'm accompanied by...
Hi guys, my name is Kalvin Nhan. I'm the Financial Crimes Analyst here for the Financial Crimes Unit here at the Bermuda Police Service.
So firstly, it starts with my apologies. I know that you were expecting Sergeant Tomlinson to talk about the cybersecurity issue. My apologies for that, but at fairly late notice, he had another engagement, so you have us for the next hour. I noticed that for the joiners, you were told that it's going to be more of an interactive session. Because of our late notification, we didn't really have time to put the presentation together, but that might be fortuitous, because then you can ask the questions directly to the police service that you might be itching to have posed to them but haven't. So I wanted to start very briefly before I hand over to Kalvin to tell you about what the Financial Crime does. The Financial Crime Unit has the responsibility for pretty much all serious levels of anything to do with financial crime. And that is as far and as wide as you can think. For example, corruption, money laundering, serious fraud, cybercrime, market offences, counterfeiting, senior offences, as wide as you can think about it. And that includes some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. I have to say that our focus, whereas Tomlinson's expertise related to cybersecurity, we are on a different side. So I hope you can appreciate that some of our presentation today is going to be more slanted towards perhaps the investigative side, more of the, we're touching upon cybercrime, but it's going to be more directly relating to cyber investigations. Honestly, I would really welcome, because we probably have some material to deliver to you, but certainly not enough for the hour. So please ask as many questions as you possibly can. With that being said, I'm going to hand over to Kalvin.
All right, so I guess as small business owners, I think one of the things we need to kind of come out and say is that cybercrime is something that is an emerging threat, something that we have to start to be aware of, and something that we need to address. As the world is becoming more and more digital, we're seeing more and more threats of this nature start to emerge. And because of that, we think that there are a lot of things that are very small changes that can have a very large effect for your business. And these are a lot of tips and tricks that we think that could be very, very beneficial to your business. So I guess, Paul, what do you think is cybersecurity, and how does it factor into, I guess, the day-to-day operations of a business?
Yeah, so I foresee for small and medium businesses to have two main risks. That is the internal risk, and we're talking about, the employees, the maybe poor systems controls, that type of stuff, which led to ultimately loss of inventory or some kind of other financial loss. And then it's the external threats, and I'm specifically focusing on small businesses being the targets of hacking or payment platform compromises. Try saying that quickly, and other scams. And I think that we'll go into detail in each internal and external threats in just a second. But I think it's of no secret that cybercrime, our forte, is probably where most of our focus is going to be for this next hour or so. Certainly during COVID, I can categorically say that that cybercrime was probably one of our largest, in terms of numbers, reported crime to the BPS, and that has continued to rise. Just to give you an idea, that for the UK, for example, the UK states that every, I think this cybercrime in general is their most reported crime. So much so that they have only a limited capacity in dealing. And I think that Bermuda is beginning to see that trend as well. Certainly, since we've been keeping statistics, we can see a drastic increase in cybercrime, and that comes in many shapes and sizes. And like I said, some of those topics I'm going to touch upon in the next few minutes. So, okay, any questions so far?
One of the questions we have is, good afternoon. Is it true that Bermuda recently passed legislation that will make it easier to enforce cybercrime and financial crime?
I hear that the Premier has made a public declaration that there is changes to legislation, but not at the moment. At the moment, I'm glad that legislation has been brought up as a topic. Basically, what we have now is basically the Computer Misuse Act, and that was enacted in '97. So, I mean, 20 odd years ago. It's still fit for purpose, but you can imagine how many technological advances have occurred in those 25 years or so. And the other large piece of the legislation that we mainly deal with is the criminal code. So basically, as an investigator, one of my first ports of call is an offence under the criminal code or the misuse of the Computer Misuse Act. So the Computer Misuse Act is quite specific in the number of offences that it provides. Basically, it relates to unauthorised computer access, or unauthorized computer access to commit a felony. The difference is significant in terms of sentencing and potential custodial sentences. Unauthorized computer access is a maximum sentence of only 6 months. It's a summary offence, which means that if a computer misuse offence has been detected by the small business, you must report to the BPS as soon as you possibly can. Basically, because not to go into too technical, but because it's a summary only offence, we're under a little bit of a timeline to get that matter into court. Whereas, let me just move on then to the criminal code. The criminal code has more than enough provisions: theft, deception, and any other variations of dishonesty.
I think just to add on to what Paul's saying, one of the good things that we have one of the things that we're moving towards at the BPS is that there is a mindset that now that we need to address this more specifically moving forward. Like, I think that there is I'd say like a cultural shift in that we are now paying significantly more attention to areas that maybe we didn't have the purview for before. So I think that is going to help us, along with any perceived legislation that is going to be coming out into the future.
Yeah, and when we're talking about, to add to your point there, when you're talking about cybercrime, I mean, it's perfect if you think about it for the potential fraudsters. That person can do it all electronically, using VPNs and any other way to disguise, to target your businesses pretty much anonymously. We're seeing funds that potentially go to overseas account, and tracing those funds or tracing such suspects relating to cybercrime is immensely difficult, and that's why they do it. So gone, you know, the criminal masterminds don't even have to leave their seat, you know, in front of a computer anymore. And we are seeing the impact in that, as I said, with drastically numbers increases of cybercrime. All right. No more questions? Okay. So I have just a short list of some of the scams that are in operation at the moment. I hope you don't mind if I was to tackle the external, the most obvious, that is the scams, the small or medium business being targeted for scams. And I touched upon it, the cyber scam, and what does that look like, and what does the small business owner need to be aware of? I think that one of the most prevalent cases so far is a compromise on outside of the business. So we've got a small business now that ordinarily deals with a vendor, and that vendor supplies a number of goods, and that email, the vendor's email, is is compromised, and then the fraudster, and it's easily done. And I'm not saying that it takes an awful lot of expertise to compromise an email, but once you compromise a vendor's email, you've basically got the keys to the kingdom. You've got details of small businesses such as yourself, and that fraudster will take the time to go through to see what relationship the vendor has with a small business, and if there's an invoicing relationship, to compromise. So what we've seen recently is, hey, Mr. Small Businessman in Bermuda, I know that that for the sale of goods, you would ordinarily send $10,000 to a UK or a US address. However, there's been a problem, and can you please now send some of money to an entirely separate account in the middle of nowhere, where perhaps there are not as stringent banking controls. That's a very difficult, for a small business, and it comes from their legitimate email address. So, I mean, you as a small business owner or the medium business owner have to say, okay, maybe just ask more questions. Why the heck am I sending money to a different account? I'm not due, for example, to send any sums of money. So I think the trick is, in the first instance, is to ask as many questions as you possibly can, why there's a change of banking details. And trust me, this has occurred numerous occasions. I've encountered this as the head of the department on very many cases and many occasions. Oh, we have another question.
Yes. So what support does the BPS offer to organizations which suffer from a ransomware attack?
Yes. So for those that are not familiar with ransomware is perhaps where you might download malicious software onto your computer or inadvertently install malicious software, and ransomware pretty much locks up on your computers. And for a small or medium business owner, that computer might be networked to other computers, shop floor or to the sales or to wherever. So that potentially you have a whole network of computers that are all locked up. And what ransomware looks like is you can't even get into any of the screens. There'll be a big red flashing screen up that says that your computer is locked, and unless you pay a certain amount of funds, usually via a crypto, more about that in just a second, to a crypto address, then all your computers and all your data is going to be encrypted. Massive, scary thing for a small or medium business owner. You pay, I don't know, sometimes relatively small amounts, under $1,000 to a random crypto address in order for your data to get compromised, in order for your data to be unencrypted. Is it difficult? I can't sit here today and say that you must not send that money, but to be honest, you just play it into the fraudster's hands. So in relation to your question there, what do we offer in terms of to organizations who suffer from a ransomware attack? There is a National Crime Agency and Interpol agency joint website, and it's called No More Ransomware. Basically, it's all the police services that's got together, and you can Google it and you'll be able to see it. And they have solutions for a number of ransomware attacks. It may well be that they have, if a business is subject to ransomware, it may be that they have that online software solution to prevent you from your data being encrypted or de-encrypted, and prevent you from having a massive loss of data for your business.
So just to add on to what Paul's saying, for each ransomware attack, depending on how the program is being programmed or the certain way the architecture of the program is implemented, then there are many different keys that do exist that is essentially part of this database that different police services around the world put into, and so that if something like this was to happen, what the BPS would say is our first issue is to identify, what is going on, what the situation is, and then from there see if going into this database we might have access to a key, because maybe this ransomware has been used by fraudsters in different countries. A lot of fraudsters, they'll see something that works, they'll probably perpetuate it, meaning that maybe the issue that you're facing has been faced by someone in the States, in Canada, in the UK, in Jamaica.
Because of that, it's always good to contact the police whenever issues like this happen. The sooner the better, because, and I guess we'll just ask this to Paul again, but when you're in a situation like this, what are the risks when you pay into the fraudster's hands?
You are pretty much confirming that their ransomware software works. There is absolutely no guarantee that they're going to press a button and give the software solution. So it really is roll your dice. I was going to take up a point there about the crypto. So you'll be asked, as I said, to deposit a sum of money into a crypto address, and I think that traditionally that has been considered as an anonymous way to make a payment. I think times are changing. I think that the police services all around the world now have an ability to track and trace crypto payments. Recently described to me as it's no longer the Wild West, whereas before it was by scammers, by anyone involved in the underworld, to be a foolproof means of not being detected. It's no longer that case. I won't go into the details how we detect it, but it's times are changing. I hope I've answered that question there, but I think that the watchword is that our advice is not to pay the ransomware. Look for this no more ransomware website. But ultimately, as I said, if you choose to make the payment, there's absolutely no guarantee that your data is going to come back anyway. And there's different variations of it. You might be targeted then as a person or having systems that are susceptible to installing ransomware. And all the usual, must-have firewalls, must have adequate antivirus to prevent those malicious softwares being installed.
So we actually have another question when it comes to critical infrastructure for Bermuda.
Yeah.
So is there a framework or standard in place for critical infrastructure, telco, telecommunications, government BPS to adhere to cyber best practices?
Is there a framework or standard in place for critical infrastructure to adhere to cyber best practices? I'm not sure of a particular framework. I'm not sure if you are, but I'm not sure whether or not there is a framework.
I think that that was actually one of the points that they were planning to talk to,
right,
to speak to. So currently, I believe that there's something in the works, but I'm not sure if one actually does exist.
I know that there is a national agency that deals with cyber threats, but I'm not sure whether or not they've standardized a framework or infrastructure. But it's a really good question. It's something that I will get back to the organization who's put on this presentation and hopefully get back to you with that answer. And the name of that ransomware database, it's not actually a database, it's a website. It's No More Ransomware. Apologies for my Welsh twang. It's No More Ransomware, which is, as I said, it's an Interpol, Europol, NCA, National Crime Agency. They've all got together and pooled their resources in ransomware threat detection and encryption tools, or decryption tools, I should say.
So as this is a BDCE webinar, one of the things that we wanted to share with you guys are just simple tips and tricks that can help really level up your cybersecurity game, make things a lot easier, and really kind of de-scope and reduce the overall exposure you have to fraudsters and these sort of cybersecurity risks. So one of the very, very simple ways, and Paul and I have mentioned it on many, many occasions right now, is just really to upgrade and implement a antivirus and make sure that your firewalls and your presets on your computer and on your systems at work, at your company, on your personal computer, they're up to date. Understanding that Microsoft or Norton or whatever provider that you are planning to use or are currently using, they are constantly updating as the threats are coming out. So being up to date can do a huge, can essentially make sure that a lot of risks are taken care of by an automated system, and hitting the update button every 1 month, every 2 months, every 3 months, turning on automatic updates. that's actually something that's really easy, but can have a lot of benefit for your organization. Additionally, you can make sure that you have two-factor authentication. So depending on whether or not this is your business email, this is your login for your main systems, maybe there is a two-factor authorization when it comes to your primary vendor, so that you know whenever your vendor is sending you a piece of information, sending you a request, you have a secondary code word or code password, or there is a random number generator that you all use so that you can further verify the vendor. Now, understanding that if you need a secondary authentication to be able to log into your work email, that just means that if someone was to try to compromise your email, they would also need to have your cell phone as well. Essentially, we're just trying to make things really, really difficult for any sort of fraudsters or hackers or bad actors to try to get into your more sensitive areas of information. Paul, I don't know if you have any other tips.
I wanted to move on, if you don't mind, and talk about fraudulent credit card data. So I mentioned at the start of this that we'd seen an increase, especially during COVID. And the reason why I picked that period was because that, during COVID, that businesses were allowed to open, but a lot turned to online platforms, selling their stock via, and certainly this police department has seen an increased number of compromised credit cards being submitted to vendors where goods were fraudulently obtained. I appreciate that vendors had no other option if they wanted to survive, that they had to turn to that. But we saw a large number, or an increased number, I should say, of foreign issued credit cards, and the business would receive an email order from perhaps a free email address, asking for, generally it's alcohol, it's electronics, it's the big ticket items, and that's been asked, like I said, coming from a free email address, and here's my credit card details, and please deliver to an unknown address or an abandoned home or a house that isn't used, with instructions to, I don't know, keep the goods around the back, and you're not going to, the delivery driver is not going to see any face-to-face interaction with someone. And we still get that now, in fairness. But just to give you, not to scaremonger, but credit card details and credit card data is quite easily compromised. I mean, I could go to the dark web now and it could easily be purchased for a few dollars at a time, and that includes, names, address, full credit card details, CVV numbers, expirations date. I think the going rate on the dark web is about $3 to $5 for a full credit card details. So, as I talked about some of the red flags there, to deliveries to anonymous addresses, or to lesser used or even abandoned addresses, foreign issued credit cards, and let's say these free email addresses, the foreign credit cards. But I think that it puts, I think, small business owners in a tough position. When do you say no? Just because it's a foreign issue card, you don't turn that business down. But I think that, having a contact name, having a contact number to say, hello, John Smith, I want to deliver directly to you rather than to an abandoned house, for example. Anything on that?
I mean, one of the things that I guess from a small business perspective is taking the time out to get to know your customers a little bit better. Obviously, as restrictions are starting to reduce and we're starting to see more in person, this is going to be a little bit easier. But if you have returning customers that make repeat purchases, take the time out to identify them, maybe get their name or just other identifiable information that you could use, and really look at their purchasing history and their purchasing behavior, because then a lot of times when you see an order that comes from them that just happens to fly way off the radar, then you can flag that, identify it with them, and who knows, maybe you will save a strong business relationship that you have with that customer. So understanding that and making sure that we just take that little extra step, even though it is, I agree, it is kind of tedious, can actually be very beneficial for the business in the long run.
And just if I was to very quickly shoot back to the how easily credit card data was compromised for the small business owner, I think that the small business owner has to be sure that they have adequate payment platforms that doesn't allow the compromise. But I mean, you only got to look online and see that, the amount of people that are compromised on a fairly daily basis. It's these folks, they sit in have massive technical skills, and they're hacking full time. So I mean, the payment platforms, the last thing you want to do as a smaller medium business size owner is to have that payment platform compromised and that data being downloaded and used for a nefarious purpose, or even sold on the internet. That would be absolutely catastrophic. Not just reputationally, but also from the potential financial loss to customers.
So when it comes to small businesses, one of the risks that they have is if a fraudulently used credit card was used to purchase inventory. Once that inventory goes out, the company then comes back and says, the credit card company says, oh, that purchase was made with a fraudulent credit card, so they annul the payment, and then that means that you're now out inventory. So one of the really easy ways that you can deal with this sort of threat or this sort of risk is by using something like an escrow service, having it so that payment is put into a third party, and then that third party holds that payment while the interaction is happening. And then during that amount of time, then you give almost an additional amount of time for people to report if their credit card has been compromised. And you're able to see whether or not that extended period of time, if there's anything that is strange about the behavior, do a little background research on this purchaser, especially if it's a large purchase. And then this means that you have a third party that's holding the funds, so you're not just sending the inventory out and possibly losing that inventory and taking a loss. Sorry, I'll let you go back there, Paul. I kind of cut you off.
Yeah. So moving on from the external risk, just briefly wanted to touch upon the internal risk. None of us like to think that we have less than trustworthy employees, but unfortunately the fact is that we do. I think that we previously seen loss of proprietary data being taken by disgruntled employees. In those particular cases, we saw that databases, where work from home occurred, and they were allowed access to online databases, and they just happened to take all the client data and then used to sell against a competitor. Other internal theft, other internal controls we're talking about is, inventory, of course. What else have I got written here? Particularly the disgruntled former employees. I mean, feeding back to credit card fraud, the number of cases that we see at the moment where a banking member of a bank, an account holder, says that they have their card, they have their credit or debit card with them, but they notice that it's been used, in some of the online services, food delivery services, or purchasing from overseas. The truth is that is probably down to a compromise in some way, and one of the ways that we think has happened is internally, employees. It's so easy to scrape credit card data. I'll quickly walk through it. So if the client comes in and wants to make a payment, and you have a less than honest employee, that employee could run a credit card through a bit of hardware that just merely collects all that credit card data, process the payment to the vendor as expected, but that person, that less than honest employee, now has the credit card data, and a little bit of not very much technical savvy means that credit card data could be replicated onto a grey card, onto a similar looking credit card, or just extracted and used for online banking. And that actually sounds quite alarmist, but it's here. I can tell you now that we are seeing locally compromised credit card data being used in Bermuda. As I said, and I think at least part of that, I'm not saying all of it, but I think part of that is due to some kind of employee theft. Any more questions? No?
Currently not. Currently not.
So, I mean, we talked very generally, and we skirted over some of the issues, but if anyone wanted to walk through or perhaps a little bit more information on current scams, and there's a lot of them, I mean, feel free just to type in if you wanted perhaps more information on, I don't know, credit card compromises or any particular scams that's going around at the moment, anything to do with, you know, that might affect your business. I mean, please just type on in.
When does BPS decide to investigate a cybercrime?
So that's a good question. So we don't know when your business has been affected by a cybercrime, so we will rely entirely on the business owner reporting to us. So some quick do's and don'ts of what the business owner can do. There is a tendency sometimes to do an internal investigation, and that might mean switching on the computer, trawling through, you know, some of the data. And my advice is not to do that. Basically, every time you switch a computer on and off, or anytime you alter a database, it's not in its original form. When we talked about some of the offences that, you know, especially under Computer Misuse Act, time is really of the essence. As I said, not just for sentencing, but we'd like to know as soon as we can. I'm certainly not a computer expert, but the BPS does have experts where they can take a detailed look of how the fraud occurred, or how the compromise occurred, and that means a forensic analysis of computers. I know that there's a toss-up of, you know, do I give my business computer to the BPS to make, you know, to conduct a forensic analysis and offset that against, well, I need that computer for my own business. But if the business owner is serious about detecting and catching perpetrators, then we'll try to make as most accommodations as we can in making a forensic extract of your computer to find out where the compromise, where the theft, where the vulnerability occurred.
Oh, we have another question. So do you see much cybersecurity or ransomware attacks on international businesses in Bermuda, or do they mostly target local businesses?
Do you know, I can probably honestly only say that there's probably a handful of ransomware cases that have been reported to the BPS, and in almost all of those cases, they were by small businesses. I don't know whether or not that's a networking issue, whether or not there's, I don't know, whether there's more. For example, the BPS system means that it's all network, but you basically can't download any malicious software because all bells and alarms will go off. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. And I wondered whether or not that's the same as, you know, the large businesses where they have network
stronger infrastructure.
Yeah, right. As opposed to, you know, a small business who might not have that. But in answer to your question, we're seeing generally ransomware victims are small businesses.
Oh, we got a couple more questions. Do you have any advice on the type of training small businesses can do for owners and employees?
Did you mean, I mean, when you said about training, hey Mercer, how are you doing? I know, when you say that advice and training on small businesses, I'm just trying to think, I'm trying to get an idea what type of training that's.
So I think in some of the businesses that we've dealt with or I've worked for personally before I came to the BPS, there are standardized trainings that you provide to your employees by the employer. And these trainings can deal with what to do if you get a strange email, training to offset phishing scams.
Right.
So a lot of these sort of trainings are just sort of standardized things that are best practices in whatever industry you're operating in. If you're operating in a consulting industry, you'll have your own standardized training, or at least a benchmarked training that is often provided. Or if you're working in manufacturing, or if you're working in telecommunications. So generally, depending on the regulator that is operating, or whatever field you're operating in, there will be standardized trainings that you can access depending on what field and where you're operating.
I have a story, an anecdotal story, where a small business was subject to false invoicing fraud, and lost quite a bit of money. And what the IT manager did was sent a mocked up scam email to all the employees to see whether or not there was that, okay, they'd been scammed, or whether or not the business had been scammed through this compromise, this false invoicing, whether or not there was more of a recognition of the signs to look for. So the IT manager sent a similar type of scam type of email, and it asked all users, all employees, the same employees who had been scammed a few weeks previously, for credit card data. Over 50% of the employees entered their credit card details. So that goes to show that perhaps there is a need for more employee training, for recognition of scams, how to spot them. I mean, I think that I can spot a scam, and perhaps if that needs to be a separate training session on the markers that needs to that comes out from spotting a scam, then I'd be happy to do that.
And if a business suspects their system has been compromised and reports to the BPS, will the computer system be damaged as a part of the analysis?
Absolutely not. So, so the way that I'm no expert on this, but the computer is basically imaged. Say you have a hard disk, the imaging, as I understand it, is just a mirror of what's on that disk. No data other than what is necessary for the investigation is used. There's no damage to it. Any confidential or sensitive information, that's not touched upon. Basically, when we have this image data, it's going to be in the form of a copy, hard portable drive. That's plugged into our software, and we use keyword searches. We'll basically be directed to what we're looking for, rather than, we don't do a troll, because some disks are, what, terabytes in size. We just under the time, so it's a directed, targeted search of what we're looking for. So in answer to the question, Orly, then absolutely not.
Yeah, it's almost like a clone. We clone the whole computer, and then we operate off the clone, so we don't actually interact with any of your data.
And just to give some comfort in relation to that, when the case is done, we don't keep hold of your data. It's erased. We have no need to keep hold of your corporate data at all.
Thanks for all the good info. Hopefully this recording can be provided to the BEDC members. Oh, yeah, I think that's, we can definitely do that.
Yeah. So we were also provided a list of questions.
Yes. Okay, I guess we'll just start. All right. So I'm just going to jump in and answer some of the easy ones. So
no, great. Thank you.
Ones.
Yes.
But what about cybersecurity for Macs? So this has actually been a kind of a rule of thumb for a really long time, that Macs are more secure than PCs. Now that was because back in the 1990s, when computers were coming up, there was a significant number of people that were using PCs and very few people that were using Macs. So when it comes to fraudsters, if you were going to build sort of compromising software, it made more sense because you get more bang for your buck by building PC software. And PC and Mac software are generally fairly different because they operate on different OSs. Different operating systems. So is a Mac harder to compromise nowadays? No, it's about the same. It is done differently, but because of the prevalent use of Macintosh computers now in this day and age, PC and Macs don't really have that difference, and there's no additional security when it comes to a Mac than on PC.
one of the questions is, what is the required time frame to report a cyber incident, and who do you report it into Bermuda? Who do you report it to in Bermuda? So previously, up until very recently, there's different investigative departments, and we never really knew, which department would deal with it. If you knew, for example, an officer in the police service, that department might deal with it. We used to have a fraud reporting address, which came directly to this department, the fraud department. I think that there was a realization that we could deal with it slightly better and to have a sole source, a sole reporting portal, and that's via 211, the non-emergency number 211. There's an email address at 211@bps.bm, and they've been recently trained. Basically, we've rolled out first responder training to the 211 operator, and we'll firstly give you triage advice, but also they're trained to figure out of which department is going to deal with it. As I said, we are the financial crime department, but we may not deal with every single matter relating to cybercrime. So 211 is the portal for that. The required time frame to report it, as I said, as soon as possible. Any day that you don't report it to the police service is a day of investigation lost.
So how can a small business do an assessment on a company that they want to use for hosting? So a lot of businesses, you'll have a lot of information that you need hosting on. This would mean renting server space. This might mean that you are moving a lot of your business operations to the cloud and stuff of that nature. So you want to find a business that is reputable. You want to find a business that has the capacity to deal with the type of hosting that you want. And you need to find a business that has a history of being able to secure data. So it kind of goes towards doing a little background research on the business that you're planning and the services you're planning to purchase. So making sure that this business has not in the past divulged customer information, understanding that this business has strong best practices when it comes to dealing with cybersecurity, understanding that there are multiple layers of verification that are in place for you to interact with your own data. Means that if a fraudster was trying to replicate your login credentials or replicate your main ability to access your data, then they would have to go through the same essential steps that you would have to go through as well. So doing this sort of background research into the hosting company means that it may be tedious now, but in the future, if there was an incident, you are more likely to be protected than not.
The next question kind of ties up with the question that's been posed online there, and that is,
wow. Yes.
Any advice on small businesses using vendors, making sure that relationship doesn't increase cyber risk, which is actually tying into the question I have, which is, if a vendor tells me that they've been hacked, what do I need to do with my company and my customers? Let's take this one for as a start. Kind of all related to the same thing.
Okay.
If a vendor tells you that they've been hacked, and I'm assuming that's an email hack, as I said, they potentially may have communications between between yourself and the vendor talking about invoicing, and there's a potential that I spoke briefly about there about the false invoicing fraud. That's the way that fraud occurs. In terms of the company and your customers, I don't see that would impact your business. The compromise is on their side, and the only thing that they're going to see is any email communications between themselves and you. So I don't think in this scenario it would affect your company on your customers. I don't think that there's any compromise to be worried about in that scenario. If there's a wider, if there's a compromise of an online or an online platform, then that's an entirely different matter. But as I read it, this is an email compromise.
So when I'm actually just going to address the question that we just got, because I do know that certain businesses will use payment vendors.
Yeah.
So they'll have a payment gateway, and then that gateway will be how their customers pay. So say like Interact or Global Payments or something like that, or maybe an voice recognition telephone system. That might be a separate vendor. So that would mean that that vendor would interact with your customers before you do, and then you would essentially get a lump sum payment from that vendor. So if that vendor is hacked, that means that you should, first things first is to identify to your customers that use that vendor, hey, our vendor has been hacked, so please provide them with an alternative method to get payment to you, maybe a secondary vendor, a backup vendor, or identify whether or not the vendor has quarantined the situation, whether or not which records of your customers have been accessed by fraudsters. If the fraudsters came in, identified these records, and then we quarantined it, but while they hadn't gotten access to all of the data, they did get access to a portion of it, then it's good to identify that to your customers themselves so they can take the necessary actions to protect themselves now that their data has been breached. So the advice is communicate. Communication is the best way for us to deal with this. If something happens and a risk happens, it's generally better to get in front of it. So let your customers know that their data may have been breached and to take necessary precautions, whether that be them changing their own passwords, them reaching out to their own credit card companies to put a watch on there to make sure that if any strange or suspicious spending goes on, then they're alerted right away. And really just identify if there is a need for you to find a different vendor, or if the vendor itself is taking steps towards securing themselves so that this is a one-time issue.
Fabulous. This is the next question. I understand that it's recommended not to pay a ransom, but is it legal for a corporation to pay the ransom, especially if it's suspected that bad actor is tied to a sanctioned nation? I have no doubt that the bad actor is going to be tied to a sanctioned nation. That seems to be where all the bad actors relating to cybercrime generally are at the moment, speaking very generally, of course. But is it illegal to pay for a corporation to pay the ransom? No, it's not. As I said, aside from no guarantee, I remember this. Once the scammers knows that you are a victim, that you are willing to pay, I've noticed a trend where you seem to be extra super targeted then for additional scams. I think that they refer to it as like a suckers list, I think. But once they've got your IP address, and once they know that an email address, once they know that you are willing to pay in some manner, then you seem to be the victim, not you. The victim seems to be targeted, extra targeted. So in short, no, it's not illegal to pay a ransom. I say it's a really tough decision between a small business and a corporation when a catastrophic loss of data and paying effectively generally under $1,000 to have your data back. A really tough decision. And I'm not going to sit here and say you should not, because in some occasions you might, but the general advice is not to, for all the reasons that I just mentioned.
So one of the questions we have on here is, how much of the budget do you think should be spent on cybersecurity? Well, unfortunately, that is depending on the field that you're working in, depending on which jurisdiction you're working in. If you're working in a more high-risk jurisdiction with a more trend of bad actors, then you'd have to spend a lot more. If you are dealing with more sensitive information, if you're, say, a law office, then a lot of your clients' sensitive information that really pertain to the operation of the business is in digital format, which means that generally it would be much more preferable for you to spend a lot more on cybersecurity than, say, you are a pastry shop. Generally, not to say that pastry shops don't deal with their own set of cybersecurity woes, but depending on the field, depending on where you operate, that kind of dictates the budget that you're using for cybersecurity.
I think we're heading towards that way.
The end, yeah.
I mean, give you another maybe a minute or so to ask any questions, but I mean, if there are not, then we'll probably start to think about winding it up.
Cool.
Yeah, just one more minute if you have any.
Oh, we got one last question. Should small businesses have any cybersecurity concerns related to social media? Okay, that's a really good one because obviously, since everyone is becoming more digital, social media has become a go-to spot for businesses. Like most strategic plans for businesses, like within the last 5 years or 10 years, have been focused around social media. And so from a social media capacity, there is a lot of reputational risk that can go on. If a hacker was to access your social media, a lot of the social media managers that worry about a business's page, they are operating that business page through their own personal, which means that you have an extra layer of exposure that you have because you don't know what your employees are engaging in from a personal standpoint. So understanding that you need to have a master password for that social media account, and understanding that nothing that is on the social media or that is held by your employees' accounts can be used to access information for your business. So they wouldn't be able to track from your social media and use that as a way to access your corporate accounts or corporate email. Understanding that if you have a social media there that is not directly connected to a main email account for the business, if it's connected to a third account and then that account is then attached to your business account, means that you have that air gapping if necessary. So yes, there are a lot of risks that come with social media, and I mean it's not a lot of risk, but the risk exists. The benefits tend to outweigh the risk, but it's always good to have an understanding of a worst case scenario for that.
So
that is true. Yeah.
This comment, I mean, you might, folks who may not have access to that, the comment is that social engineering would provide info for hackers to gain access. So the risk is actually larger than many know. I think I genuinely agree.
I think so too. I think the best thing to do is, seeing as your employees have their social profiles open, hypothetically, if someone was to do research on your employee and then create or spoof an email to say, hey, I'm John Doe or Joe Blow, and I'm the manager for this social media page. I can't get in. Can you let me in, or can you provide this? And then you do research on the corporate page, then at that point you should have a secondary authentication capability, whether that be, oh hey, what is a set of security questions, like what was the first the color of your desk when you first came in. Understanding that, having that information and knowing that that information is protected means that at the very least you have a way to mitigate that risk. But yes, that comment's very, very, very true. I just want to take this up.
For example, can you give an example of a time when a BPS has found a hacker? We see hacks on a daily basis. Now, knowing that all the ways that, I mean, they're not gonna, if they're in, I don't know, if they're in a foreign jurisdiction, any hacker that is worth their salt is not going to make our life easy. So they're going to put it through anonymous portals. They're going to use any number of tools. So once we've identified a hack, and which has resulted in a loss of funds, the recovery, our focus is generally on the recovery of the funds. And for example, if we identify that an IP address that's coming from, I don't know, just any country, Nigeria, for example, yes, probably that hacker is situated in Nigeria. But for example, it's almost like we can expect a low level of cooperation from the Nigerian police. So identifying hacking is one thing, but enforcement actions and bringing a hacker to justice is somewhat a slightly different picture, which is why, as I said, the BPS focuses on the recovery of the funds first.
Right, so I think we're getting towards the end.
Thank you, Carmen. So the comment is that the recovery of the funds is more important, and that is also, I think, that the victim of the crime would also agree that they want their money back first, rather than the person brought to justice. And I'm sure they do want the suspect brought to justice, as do we. We've spoke about a lot of topics, and I hope that it's been beneficial. Some of it, we've used our experiences and some of our opinions. I mean, but it doesn't have to be the end. If there was an interest in perhaps a more specific relating to cybercrime, then I'd be more than willing to participate. But thank you for joining us today, and stay safe digitally.